Ecology is amazing. It's the study of how the world works and the story of how all the living things on it work together or against each other in order to survive. So let's take a look at some of the key words and terms that might help you in understanding ecology. And so in order for you to study ecology, you need to be able to understand all the terms that are used. Okay, number one, environment. This is the surroundings all around you. Number two, organisms. Well, they're all the living things that live within the environment. And another term that you need to know is the term ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem is something that you could recognise as being a very different environment from the last one. And so we can recognise the desert, that's an ecosystem, the ocean, that's an ecosystem, forests, jungles, they're ecosystems, tundra, like in the Arctic, that's an ecosystem. And within those ecosystems there are these different habitats. Well, all living things have their own habitat, which is like their home. Their habitat provides lots of things for them. It provides shelter, it provides protection, it provides warmth, it provides a place for them to feed, it provides all the right conditions that they're adapted for. It provides a place where they can survive well enough that they want to reproduce, and that is survival. There are lots of different types of habitats, such as this forest, which is alive with the sound of bird song and with rabbits and with all sorts of insects. And all those organisms are adapted to live in this habitat, whereas if you were to take them and put them into a rock pool, they wouldn't survive, not for long anyway. Another habitat is this reed bed with water underneath, fish swimming around it, birds taking shelter in it, but different types of birds and animals that live in the forest. And habitats on the seashore might be in the open sea, around the reefs, in gullies, or maybe in rock pools. And the rock pools are places where we will see the organisms taking refuge when the tide is out. However, when the tide's in, they'd be covered with the sea, and so they can carry on. In order to live in their habitats, organisms have certain adaptations, and an adaptation are the changes that the animal has had to make through millions of years in order to survive in this habitat. An example are these limpets. Now, they're not stones, they are mollusks. They're kind of related to snails. And when the tide is out, they suck themselves very tightly onto the rock so that they can keep the seawater that they've got in, and they can keep the air and the lack of water out. And if anyone's ever tried to pull a limpet, it's very hard to get it off the rock without using a knife or maybe bashing it with a rock. But make no mistake, when the tide's in, these animals move around quite a lot, grazing on the rocks, and then as the tide goes out they return to their home scar where they live, and they nestle themselves down to be able to survive the tide being out. Now, each organism is adapted to its habitat, and so these plants here are adapted to live under the trees and have a much lower light level than maybe a Spanish bayonet tree. And rabbits are adapted to live in this kind of environment and burrow under the ground. They've got very strong paws for burrowing, they've got big ears because they're also a prey animal, which means that they have to be listening out for anything that wants to come and eat them. They're also camouflaged so that they're not easily spotted amongst the undergrowth, again to protect them from those predators. And that brings us on to talking about behavioural ecology, and that's how organisms compete against each other, maybe of the same species, so that they can get the most food, or that they can get the best shelter, or that they can get the best mates. Another example of competition are all these barnacles on a rock. They only have a certain amount of space on this rock face, but each one has got its own pitch. And if they weren't good enough at competing to get that space in the first place, then they wouldn't find a space on the rock and they would not survive. Or it looks at relationships such as predator-prey relationships. Predators are animals that are designed to be able to hunt, catch and eat other animals, whereas prey are animals that are generally herbivores. They eat plants, and they are adapted to be able to hide easily and to evade the predators the best they can and get away and live another day. Another example of a predator-prey relationship is the limpet and the dog whelk. Now, the limpet grazes the algae off the rocks, and the dog whelk hunts out the limpets, climbs on top of them, drills a little hole inside and eats the limpet. In this case, the limpet is the prey and the dog whelk is the predator. But the dog whelk can also become prey, because when the seagulls come down and eat the dog whelks, well, the seagull is the predator and the dog whelk is the prey. And when we understand about competition and predator-prey relationships, how all these organisms compete against each other with the same type of animal or different types of animals trying to catch each other, then we can look at food chains, and we can look at how all the animals and the plants are all related to one another, as one eats the next and the next eats the next. And an animal could be classed as a predator one moment and a prey for another animal the next. Another predator-prey relationship in the sea that we'd rather not think about is that humans are predators. We eat everything we can get our hands on, and all of our prey we eat up. However, once we go swimming in the sea, if a shark comes along, it could eat us. That's the apex predator, and we become its prey. But don't worry, because shark attacks are very uncommon and they really don't want to eat us. There's lots of other prey out there that's easier to catch than we are. And for our final example, you are an organism, and you live in the environment and are affected by the environment that you live in. How much sunshine there is, how much water there is to drink, how much food there is to eat. And your habitat is probably your bedroom, or maybe your house. Within your ecosystem, which is your town or village or maybe even island, and you undertake a competition with your brothers and sisters and your friends at school, where you try and get the food that you want. So if there's that last sausage roll in the canteen, then you're going to try and go for it instead of your friend, unless you're very kind. Hopefully the only predator-prey relationship that you have is that you prey on your food sources, and so you get the beef or the pork or the lamb, or we can use a vegetarian example, the tofu, which is your prey. And in that way, you're all part of the food chain and the wider ecology of the world. And if you found this Cyberteachers video informative and helpful, why not click like and subscribe, and we'll keep the Cyberteachers content coming.